Well, hello, and welcome back to that thing we like to call Curless Mania, where we talk all things pop, rock, and prog. And I'm very excited to have this gentleman back on the channel. I'm blessed. I'm so happy you're back. Mr. Matt Williamson from Pop Goes the 60s. How are you, Matt?
Doing fine, Tom. Thanks for having me back. And my third time on.
Yes, I mean I'm so excited about that, and we have a great time together, and I really I've always enjoyed his channel, and I will put a link, of course, to the to his channel below again. If you're not familiar with it, Pop Goes to 60s is excellent, excellent, excellent viewing. You cannot go wrong. I've actually learned, I'm kind of a music geek. I consider myself sort of a music geek, and I've learned a lot from his channel, so that says a lot. Um,
Well, thank
and
you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But we are here. We're going to do another. We were just commenting before we hit record that the last video I think we did was Buffalo Springfield, and that I captioned that video "brief but brilliant." And it's interesting that we are doing another band that is going to be also subtitled "Brief but Brilliant." This is becoming a theme for us, and we today are talking about the supernova that is Cream. Uh,
Yes, indeed.
First like power trio of sorts, would you say?
Well, I kind of think of Cream as the first like hard rock group of the late 60s. They kind of started it all after groups like the Yardbirds and the Stones and the Kinks and the Trogs. They got it started initially, and then Cream took it a step further, going deeper into blues and just more, they kind of inventing blues rock or taking it to the next level. And then after that, the Zeppelins came after that, and the Freeze and the Sabbaths and all that stuff. So this is kind
Right.
of the group that made the turn first.
Kind of started it all. Yeah. So do you remember the first time you heard Cream?
Well, not exactly, but so my buddy Dan, I grew up with him, and he had tons of 45s because he had all these older brothers and sisters. So he had White Room on
Okay.
45, the 45. So, but we listened. Actually, no, I take that back. That was my single. I somehow had that in my collection of 45s. And the side I listened to more was the B side, which was Those Were the Days. So that
Oh,
was something I was listening to before I was in grammar school. I was
yeah.
listening to Cream and Steppenwolf and the Stones and the Beatles, of course. But a lot of harder stuff for it would have been very early 70s, but for a real little kid. But that's just what I had.
Yeah, I mean, it was really early for me as well. My but it's funny that you said your buddy. I mean, my buddy Dan, we were like sort of the music guys in my town, and I used to go over to his house, and his parents had quite a vinyl collection. I remember looking through his parents' stuff, and they had all these Beatles albums and Stones albums, and we were like kind of devouring it. And one of the it was Hendrix and Cream were the two sort of like I remember listening to them early on, like very young,
Hmm.
and listening to Sunshine of Your Love and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hendrix Experience would be, I guess, the next group that hit along these lines just a couple months later, really.
Yeah.
But in those days, 3 months mean a big deal. And it was a
Yeah.
long time in many respects
Yes.
if you look back at the actual dates and how it all happened so quickly.
Yeah. We talk about this all the time, how in the 60s and 70s, probably more, even more so in the 60s, you're saying things moved so quickly, so fast. And you said 3 months was a long time back in the 60s.
Right. And like this group and like Buffalo Springfield both lasted around 18 months or whatever it was, which seems like a short time, but for them it might have seemed like a long time. I don't know. It was a lot going on and a lot of stuff to keep up with, so much competition.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stress that comes with all that, the fame and all the trying to compete, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's almost like the curse of becoming famous or becoming successful. You have the record company, and if you have a manager or agent or whatever, they're like, okay, where's the next product? They because you're a
Hmm.
hot group. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go next.
Yeah,
Where's the next single? Where's the next album? You know,
very true.
it's a lot. I mean, it was a lot of pressure, and these guys are pretty young guys, and they're getting all this pressure all of a sudden. Um, and some people might think, oh, that's a dream, but it's a lot. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And real, like you said, I think my favorite quote I heard about Cream was, I think Lars Ulrich of Metallica said, we've had tours last longer than their whole career.
Yeah,
Because
that's really true. Yeah.
because you think about it, they really went, like you said, they went from 66 to basically 68. By 69, they were done.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so it was so quick.
Yeah, they might
Um,
have lasted 20 months or so. That's probably I've done a video on Cream, so I covered in there, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's there. I'm sure that the facts are there in that video, so I'm sure of it. Because you always do a good job with that. So, but yeah, it's incredible. It just blows my mind because you see that they have all these albums, and you're like, there's all these records. When you first start discovering them, you're looking through, and you're like, oh, look at these records, and it's like, okay, how did they make all those albums in that short of a time? But I mean, some of them are kind of posthumous, of course. Like
Hmm.
Goodbye was kind of, and we can talk about it. We'll get to Goodbye, but before let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start with Fresh Cream. So 1966, and I think that um might be the most raw take on this group. It kind of feels pretty live in the studio. Would you say so? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how long it took them to record it off top of my head, but yeah, it's a pretty gritty album, and it's basically what they were doing on stage. And they weren't together that long before they started recording. I think they got together in about July of officially July of 1966. And they were doing some old blues numbers, and that album is has got a couple songs, also a couple songs they didn't often do live, but it's a good mix of songs.
Yeah. Now these guys, it's funny. This is one thing that as an American, I was complete, and I'm sure you cover this in your video as well. As an American, I was very no, I was not hip to the fact that this. I said, why were they a supergroup? I'm confused. Why is supergroup? But in the UK, this was a supergroup because these guys all came from bands that were popular in the UK. Um, of course, you mentioned already Eric Clapton with the Yardbirds
Hmm.
and then Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce had played together in another popular sort of R&B group, which
Yes, that would
was
be the Graham Bond organization.
yes,
And
thank
I
you.
wouldn't say they were popular. I mean, they did not have hits. They were a club band. So when the Beatles hit, say we're January 63, in London, it was just blues or jazz. There was not a rock and roll scene.
Right,
And
right.
the blues and jazz, like the Stones became the resident band somewhere, and then they were replaced by the Yardbirds. And slowly, after the Beatles hit, record companies could smell hits, and it kind of went more pop.
Yeah,
And the term
yeah,
supergroup, I'm not sure. I think that started getting used around the time of Crosby, Stills, Nash. I don't think this term supergroup was being applied. It wouldn't have been applied to Cream because
okay,
Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker were relatively unknown outside of the club scene.
right.
Clapton was known because he played with the Yardbirds and they had a hit. They were had For Your Love and he was on that. So he was
Hmm.
already known. But this was the dawn of the supergroup and that whole
Right,
concept, which was usually a something that very seldom worked.
right, right. No, true. It's very true. And I honestly, it's interesting. Now, would you say that we're touching on this a little bit, but it's almost like I always feel like Bruce and Baker kind of came from more of a jazz world, and then Clapton was sort of the blues purist coming in, and I think that was kind of what made this band interesting because it was almost like this collision of blues and jazz together.
Yeah, I would say Jack Bruce was probably the in-between guy. He did both jazz
Right,
and blues.
right.
Baker would be more jazz would be more his preference, and that's where he cut his teeth on, I think, and learned from some really good players. Clapton was pretty much straight blues, and yeah, straight blues licks. And
Yeah.
when they got signed to the record label, which was Robert Stigwood, that is the same company that had signed the Graham Bond organization. So they thought Cream would just be something like that would just do the same club scene. They
Right,
had no
right.
idea. They had no foresight this would be big.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. And really in 66, this really was pretty groundbreaking stuff. When you listen to this
Mhm.
record, it's
Yeah.
it's it's interesting. It's I think that it's kind of set this template of like they sort of have like they I always say with Cream, they had all these little things that they would touch on. They had the blues stuff that that Clapton loved so much, and he would bring in like, hey, let's do this cover, let's do this, let's do Spoonful, and let's do,
Hmm.
Crossroads, and let's do and then also they had this uh sort of like you said, almost like Jack Bruce would write these kind of like poppier songs almost. I mean, not poppy, but like a little bit more like rock
Yeah, I
songs.
can't. Yeah, and some of his songs that weren't even on that first album, they weren't, you couldn't even categorize them. Like the first
Yeah.
single, Wrapping Paper, which is, I don't know what you should even
Wrapping
call that.
paper.
Yeah. I
What
mean,
is this?
that's not anything like they played on stage. So I'm not, it's just weird when you get a record contract, you try to do something commercial. So in
Right.
those days, that's kind of those, you see attempts like that by bands. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
obviously that fell flat, but they righted the ship pretty quickly.
Yes, because what happens is the psychedelic thing starts to creep in, right? It's like almost like it in 66, it's not quite blossoming yet, but then in 67, you start getting more the Flower Power era, the San Francisco, the Sergeant Pepper, things are starting to change, and this sort of
Mhm.
psychedelic rock thing starts to happen, and they start to gel around that a little bit,
Correct. I think
up in like,
that
you know,
helped save them really because the whole drug scene, as it entered into the rock scene and they became the same scene essentially, the thing that came along with that was louder music.
right,
And,
right,
post Sergeant Pepper is when all these things branched off. So the hard rock stuff that Hendrix was doing, Cream and then Steppenwolf, that was a whole, genre of music within rock.
hmm,
And Cream could do that. They were virtuoso players. I mean, you didn't really have virtuoso players in pop bands.
right, right, yeah,
So the Cream was unique in that way and the focus started to become not just on the songs or the melodies like the Beatles had been doing, but on the playing. Because the Beatles did not have virtuosos in their band.
right,
Despite what people
right,
want to say, McCartney gets way overrated. Unfortunately, a lot of McCartney fans, I just view them as just non-musicians.
right,
And it's not to say he's an incredible player, but McCartney was not, he was a jack of all trades, and that was his strength. So that means that he didn't focus on one area. Jack Bruce, for blues and for certain areas, could outplay McCartney, just like Ronnie lay into the faces, small faces. He laid down the bottom. So, I mean,
right.
you start getting, and in a trio, it's all exposed. There's just the three of you.
Yeah, there's nowhere to
You
hide,
better,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
you better
yeah,
be able to do it. So
yeah,
the Beatles, people, as Pete Townsend said, people didn't listen to the Beatles, or musicians didn't really listen to the Beatles for their instrumentation. They listened to the Beatles for the melodies and for their
vocals, yeah, yeah,
vocals and their harmonies.
hmm,
That's according to
yeah.
Pete Townsend. I can see
No, that's
why.
no, that's interesting. I mean that, I agree, and I really think that Cream was they really were virtuoso musicians. I mean, like you said, you can't in a trio. There's nowhere to go. You have to shine, or there's no, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, if you
you know,
compare them to the Jimi Hendrix experience, I mean, it's not even close. I guess I wouldn't say that Hendrix is a better player than Clapton. I mean, he did different things. Um,
yeah,
Hendrix didn't live long enough. Unfortunately, I think he would have probably gone in a jazz mood. But I mean, Noel Redding, he's not much of a bass player. Mitch Mitchell, he's not my type of drummer.
hmm,
Good drummer, but he's not Ginger Baker. I mean,
right, right,
he
right,
doesn't have
yeah,
the jazz chops of Baker,
yeah.
and he doesn't play as heavy as Baker either. I mean, Baker was an unbelievable drummer.
Yeah. Oh God, absolutely. No, 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 no question. He was
Mhm.
very, so I always say he's so unique. He was just such a unique drummer. He really brought something to the band, and because you can tell, when you hear songs like, I mean, it's joke because I just watched the getting ready for this. I rewatched the Beware of Mr. Baker documentary again,
Oh yeah.
and I thought
Hmm.
that was interesting. I thought it was an interesting movie, and it's funny how he says things like, and he's not wrong. He says things like, hey man, without that bolero thing, that White Room, he's like, I brought that to the song, ding,
Yes.
jing, 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 ding, ding. He's like, I brought that to that song. It wouldn't be the same without it.
Yeah, I mean, just to
You
give you an
know,
example of what Baker did bring to Cream when he was with the Graham Bond organization, he was using African rhythms and different things. And there's some songs in the Graham Bond organization in the two albums they recorded that are really rather interesting. And it's not actually jazz, but it's more African. So he had, and that was really helpful, I think, coming into Cream when they went in this harder rock direction. It wasn't his jazz chops, it was the African influence, I think, that helped him.
Yes, absolutely. And he talks about that a lot in the documentary. But things like NSU, for example, on this record, where
Hmm.
you're saying like, "Where's the one?" You didn't. It's hard to figure out where is the one on that. Like, it's incredible. It's really, really interesting stuff. Um, and so, but so they, you know, really, this album does launch them, and they do people do recognize them pretty quickly as this virtuoso band, and then they really launch into the stratosphere in the riding the psychedelic wave that we talked about with Disraeli
Hmm.
Gears from 1967. And the one thing I wanted to say, before I hand it over to you is this record, I read that Clapton was very excited about when they finished this album. They recorded it with Felix Papalardi. I don't know if you say it.
Felix Popularity, yeah.
Papalardi and
Hmm.
Tom Dowd, and they were all excited about it when they finished it, and they should have been. It was a really, really good, really great record, and this has "Sunshine of Your Love" on it, and I mean, they were really excited about it. But he said that when it got released, all anyone was talking about was the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So because
Ah,
RU Experience had just come out, and he said it was just the summer of Hendrix. And that's all anyone was
okay.
talking about. So he felt that Hendrix kind of overshadowed this record a little bit, but.
Could be. I think that Disraeli Gears is far better than Are You Experienced. It's just got a more varied types of songs on it. You know, Hendrix, I like his slower songs on that first album much better. I think his playing, his underplaying works well. Some of the other stuff is just loud to me, and I don't feel that way about Cream. I don't feel it's loud for loud's sake. I get
Right.
that feeling with the Hendrix Experience a bit, but yeah, I mean it's too bad. I mean this album was a huge hit, so and they had two actual chart hits off of it, so they didn't have to worry too much.
Right. They were still successful. Absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
Strange Brew, right? Strange Brew and
Strange
Sunshine of
Brew,
Your Love.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's funny, I remember seeing like they would show on once in a while on TV, they would show those old BBC clips of uh of of like bands playing like Ready Steady Go,
Yeah.
and there's that
Hmm.
famous clip of them doing like miming to Strange Brew, and it just Clapton's got that huge afro and it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's wild. It's funny. And
Yeah.
like Ginger's barely hitting the drums, and you can tell he is like because of TV, he can't, he's just miming. It's just but I really I think this album is like to your point, I think this record is very innovative and very well done, and there's a lot of very, again, I keep bringing the word up, but unique, just extremely unique songs on this record, you know.
Yeah, and Ginger Baker, what made them so good, and we talked about them being virtuosos, is that I think that Ginger Baker was the first drummer to actually somewhat be recognized as using the drums as a lead instrument. And you can do that more so in a trio, but he was that good. His,
Yeah.
if you like, for the example, Sunshine of Your Love is a perfect example where the drums are as important as what people were considering the lead guitar was.
Right. Right.
So he didn't play it just as a rhythm section. He played it as a lead instrument in many instances.
Yeah. No, and I think that was sort of revolutionary because there's so many drummers that cite Ginger Baker as an influence. And I think it was the influence was, wow, look, he's like featured. Like the drummer is featured in this band.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like he's not being buried. He is part of, like, he's right up
I mean,
front.
unlike the Dave Clark Five, it's not the same
Right.
thing,
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Because, Dave Clark was way, way up on still in the way in the back on a big, wasn't he like elevated
Yeah,
like above the band or something?
yeah. Maybe in some of the promo photos, he might have been in the
Yeah.
front with the other band in the back, and
Yeah.
but as people were finding out that Dave Clark didn't play on any of his tracks or anything, he didn't write anything. It was more of a farce band than anything.
That's another story. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a topic for another video.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But like, to your point, Sunshine of Your Love, if you listen to it, it's the rhythm is so interesting. It's like it's almost, yeah, I think he said something about I played it backwards, whatever that means, but it kind of makes sense when you listen to it. He's doing that do do duh, do. He's not doing anything that you would expect.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So
Yeah.
so excellent. I mean, and so and just a great record. I love Strange Brew. And what's funny is that Strange Brew was actually written by Felix, or Felix took it from another song that they did called Loudy Mama, I
Yeah,
think it was
yeah. Hey,
called.
Lottie Mama, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's like the
Lottie
same
Mama.
riff.
Mhm.
It's the same exact riff. He just took that and made it Strange Brew, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I like both.
Yeah,
Strange Brew is more of a pop song and more of a
right.
psychedelic pop song, which totally worked. So
Yeah.
Popularity knew what he was doing. I think that was the right move, even though
Oh, absolutely.
Jack Bruce didn't like it too much, apparently, because by doing that, his bass pattern didn't follow properly. So he was upset about that. But
Oh, really?
whatever, they
Okay.
had a hit off of it. So,
Yeah, it
they,
made
they
it.
were
It was a
always,
hit, so it worked.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they were
yeah,
always complaining about something.
yeah, yeah. But fantastic record.
Mhm.
Love this album.
Yeah, I don't know. I for a long time I thought this was their best album, but I've always loved the first album. I love the third album. It's they've got good stuff through and through. So,
They really do. They really do have great stuff all throughout the career. Um, so that brings us to the next record, which Wheels of Fire, which ends up being a double record in 1968. And at this point, I mean, I think after Disraeli Gears, I think they became this bigger band, and they had toured in the States, and they had played places like the Fillmore where they would just let them stretch out and play these long jams, which they had not been able to do before. They had
mhm.
been lower on the, those bills that were like 10 bands and they'd play for like 10 minutes. And it was like, this is not the kind of band we are. And then once they were off the leash at places like the Fillmore, they could really just jam and people loved it, you know?
Yeah, the new the ballrooms in San Francisco and these type of places like the Fillmore were made for improvisation. And the people that went, this is where the drug scene collided with the rock scene. So for some reason, these long jams, it was more trance-like, and it went better with the experience apparently.
Right.
And
Right.
everybody started stretching out that you had to have your long song on an album, and
Hmm.
then you were expected to do something long or stretch out live. And very
Hmm.
few bands could do that like Cream, though it got tiring after a while.
Yes, yes, we'll get to that. We'll get to that because I agree. But this album, this is still has, to your point you said earlier, it still has some amazing highlights, right? I mean, it's White Room. I mean, come on, I still love White Room to this day. I just think it's a great,
Mm,
great song.
yeah.
And is that a Pete Brown, Jack Bruce song?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did do the lyrics on that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Peter
Because
Brown. Yeah.
Pete Brown was collaborating with Jack Bruce on the lyrics a lot. I mean, I think right, he was a poet or something like that.
Yeah, and he collaborated with both Ginger Baker and Eric Clapton too. So a couple of
Okay,
groups, they could write the music, but lyrically they just had to bring somebody else in. The Grateful Dead was one and Cream was another.
okay, gotcha. Yeah, and so it's very interesting. I mean, the lyrics are interesting. I mean, things like Pressed Rat and Warhog is an interesting Ginger Baker kind of talks over the talks
Hmm.
over the song, but it's like it's always I always find it fascinating that song for some reason.
Well, Cream really worked well. This whole psychedelic thing, I think the Disraeli Gears is like psychedelic from start to finish, pretty much. By the time you get to 68, this came out in later 68, and the psychedelic scene was dying, but they were doing stuff that was progressive psychedelia, I would say. This was not prog rock, but it was
Right,
progressive
right.
psychedelia. And Press Rat and Warthog, I guess, could be thrown in there. But you have songs like, as you said, in Passing the Time, and all those are a little more psychedelic. And then, of course, you got the live disc, which is something that they were known for. So live music also became a big deal, releasing a live version or a live album. And Cream was one of the early, really good bands to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they were so good live that it was they had to they I think they started to feel like they had to represent some live material on the record because it was like these they're making such an impression live. And then Crossroads became like I mean, that got played on the radio, an edited
Hmm.
version of it, of course.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, and some people prefer the live disc to the studio disc. It's cut in half. I always
mhm.
prefer the studio stuff. The live stuff never quite grabbed me, but some people really prefer the live stuff. So, they had to I guess, live up to their billing and do a live disc. And not many people could do a good live album like this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean, the
but
Stones,
yeah,
if you look at the Stones live album from 66, that's a joke compared to this because the
right.
Stones were still doing small package tours. They weren't doing long concerts. The
Right.
Beatles were doing 30 minutes if you're lucky. That's what
Yeah.
everybody was doing. There was no time for playing. It was
Yeah.
rush through, get the hell off the stage so the Dave Clark Five could come on. And
Right.
so this was a interesting period where it started. They were able to capture the actual live shows, and this is the first place they were captured.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, the Stones really didn't come into their own and live until 69 when they changed guitar players and were able to do that long tour in 69.
Yeah, they couldn't have done this. They weren't the players that Cream were. They kind of work into that. They had to reinvent themselves as a live band once they got rid of Brian Jones.
Right, right, exactly. Yep, yep. They
The
were sort
the
of
anchor,
hamstrung.
the yeah, the anchor that was Brian Jones.
They were a bit hamstrung for a couple of years there. But especially in the live arena, I think they were worried about things falling apart, which they might have. But you're right. This album is kind of the first time where bands are going, "Ooh, like we got to get our live stuff together, man. If their
Oh yeah.
band's playing like this live, we gotta step it up."
This is
Um,
another reason why the Beatles were not going to tour again.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
they never said it, but you
yeah.
better believe they knew these guys personally. They were in clubs. They knew what was going on. They're like,
They were
holy
paying
shit.
attention. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Once Hendrix came, it's like, okay, we're done.
Forget
We're
it.
done with the live. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was never going to happen.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that, but that's a great point. And another thing that's interesting about, 1968. I mean, you had Electric Ladyland and the White Album, so there are a lot of double
Yeah.
albums coming out in '68.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. The Rascals had one, and let's see who else. There's probably a few more. I
yeah,
escape me at the moment, but yeah,
but it was
Donovan.
like,
Donovan had
what's
a double album,
Donovan?
early
Yes,
'68.
right,
Yep.
exactly, exactly. So it's like it was becoming like almost like a badge of honor, like I'm going to do a double album because we're a big band kind of thing. But I agree
Hmm.
with you. I think I like the studio stuff on this album better than the live stuff. It just stands up for me more. I think I love that. I admire the live stuff more than I love it because it goes on and on. And after a while, it's like, okay, maybe this was great when you were there, but like listening to it on record is kind of like gets a little tedious after a while for me.
Yeah, I think what does Toad go on 16 minutes? I mean,
Yeah,
7 minutes
yeah,
probably would have done it for me.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
it's
it's one of those things. The thing for live albums is part of it. Well, you had to be there.
right,
I don't think it
right.
could be better on record than actually being there, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like for me, it's the same for Led Zeppelin when they did Song Remains the Same. And it's like they did these long Dazed and Confused goes on for 15
Mm.
minutes or whatever. And it's like,
For
okay,
days. Yeah.
goes on forever. It's like, okay, I'm getting bored here listening to this. But if you were there, I'm sure you weren't bored. But anyway, yeah, so I think this is a great record. I think there's a lot of I mean, one song that I forgot it was so good is Deserted Cities of the Heart. Oh my God, I love that
Hmm.
track. It's a kind of a deep track, but I love it.
Yeah, it's got a lot of varying stuff on here. You got the hard rock, you got the live stuff, you've got kind of the psychedelic stuff. So it's got a good mix, a good variety.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've got so again the blues covers "Born Under a Bad Sign," which I love, and
Hmm.
"Politician," and yeah, so it's you got everything. There's little bit of everything there. Um, and then literally after the Wheels of Fire tour, they end up I kind of break up. I think after the tour because I think that tour was just brutal. I think they did like 2 or 3 tours, like a UK tour and then 2 American tours, something like
Mm.
that, like something crazy.
Yeah, they were in demand, and the money that they made a lot of money touring. So naturally, you're going to try to make the most money you can, but it kind of started to eat itself. They just couldn't be have the perfect solos every night.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
couldn't expect that of yourself.
Hmm.
And I think fans expected it because they only see the show once, they're not going to every show.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, they couldn't quite, and there was personal problems within the band, particularly between Baker and Bruce. They hated each other. So
Yeah,
that was not
yeah,
easy as well. But yeah, it just seemed to run its course. I mean, how much more can
yeah.
you do blues in a trio? As great as that you could hear the sound and they changed rock. after 18 months or so, it's like, okay, we've heard this. What
Yeah,
else you got?
right, right. Yeah, I think there was a
Which is
little bit of
why I
that.
had, and I mean, I watched Hendrix do the same thing. And I
Yeah,
think he would have gone into jazz. He was kind of going into that direction. So it would have been interesting to see what he did. But Clapton kind of pulled back and went kind of the pop rock direction. And, Layla, that I guess would be certainly not, it's blues rock, but it's not blues, not straight
right,
blues.
right. Yeah, he kind of pulled away a little bit from the blues purist thing, and kind of got more into like the root. Like he loved the band, he loved music from Big Pink, he loved Delaney and Bonnie, and he was getting into more like rootsy kind of American rock.
Yeah, and that could only take him so far, I guess. That is, so he did that, and then he
Yeah,
became kind of like a California guy, and then people in England, the players in England thought he had lost his chops by coming to America, and there's
yeah.
something to be said for that, actually.
What happened to Clapton, man? Yeah. No, it's true. And I think you're right. I think what happened was they got a review on in Rolling Stone or something that was kind of derogatory, saying like, Cream, they're getting boring because they just all they do is get on stage and shred and show off, and it gets kind of annoying. And I like you said, it was also really loud, and I like because I guess Baker was saying that they kept getting bigger amps every time they would tour, and now they had these Marshall stacks, and Bruce had a stack, and Clapton had a stack, and he said there's two stacks on both sides, and they're both blaring, and he said it was like ridiculous how loud it was, and he said that, and then I guess there was one time where Clapton said he stopped playing and nobody noticed.
Yeah, I think him and Baker maybe even walked off the stage, and Bruce was just into his playing and couldn't hear anything outside of his own playing. But yeah, that's a problem. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, Clapton. The Rolling Stone article was rather hard on Clapton. And, some of these players have rather thin skin. So Clapton didn't take it too well. And yeah, that was just kind of piling on the already issues that were going on, namely between Bruce and Baker, who I said hated each other. Their hatred went back to the Graham Bond
I was
organization.
gonna say that was
Somehow,
no nothing new, right? That wasn't
no,
new.
but they,
Yeah,
they knew good playing. They knew, I mean, the music was first.
right.
And they were able to do that. So I give them credit for hanging in there. But
They put their
again,
differences aside, right? Yeah.
just kind of run its course.
Yeah, no, and think about it. I mean, being stuck with someone in hotel rooms and buses and cars and going everywhere and being on tour with someone that long. I mean, I don't care who it is. After a while, you're gonna get like, I need a break. And I think that those two were already, like you said, they were already volatile between Baker and Bruce. It was already volatile, and then I think it was gonna explode at some point, you know?
Yeah, and it did, and well, it was kind of planned. They just said, okay, we've had enough, and they actually planned a farewell concert, which very seldom gets done. So they were
Right.
able to kind of do it in a somewhat classy way.
Yeah, Royal Albert Hall, right? Good point. I mean, I think that they were just so successful and so popular that I'm sure that, again, they were getting pressure like, hey guys, could you just at least do like one more, like do a farewell show for the fans and do like maybe an album? And they went, okay. So this album ends up coming out in '69, Goodbye. They
Hmm.
call it Goodbye, which is crazy. And kind of like you said, almost like in good spirits, like kind of doing this cover with this cabaret sort of theme, like goodbye, this is another sort of half studio, half live album. So, and it's only 31 minutes, so it's pretty it's pretty short record.
Yeah, so they kind of led off side one with two live tracks. So the side one is live. So they kind of
Mhm.
went with their bread and butter. And then
Right.
the second side of the album is more, I guess, I wouldn't call them outtakes, but they were songs they were working on. I guess they're more, yeah, the rock songs, and obviously Badge is on there, which was a single, and that was a great a great song.
Yeah, oh yeah, Badge is
I
great.
always like and doing that scrapyard thing is a fun Jack Bruce song. So yeah,
Yes.
it was. I'm glad they got a fourth album in there. That was very nice.
Yeah, I mean it's nice that they kind of were able to do one more at least, just for it kind of feels like it for the fans sort of thing. And like you said, just Badge alone. I mean, Badge is so great, and it's a co-write with Harrison, right? I think, or maybe not.
Yep. No, no, it is.
All
Yep.
right. And Harrison is of course listed as Leangelo Misterioso. I love that.
Yeah.
It's so great because of contractual stuff they can't. I love it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I love Badge is just incredible. I love that song. And then to your point, doing that scrapyard thing is kind of fun. And then of course their live stuff is always pretty pretty on point. Um, so yeah, so that ends up being, and then you see things like this, Live Cream, and then Live Cream Volume Two. You
Yeah,
know,
those two albums are considered essential parts of their catalog. So if Goodbye came out in 69, I think one of the first volume of the live album came out in 70 and the next one maybe in 71.
yep,
So they still had
yep,
a steady stream of product coming out, including a best of. So and those live ones are considered essential.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think these were all tracks that were recorded for Wheels of Fire, just didn't make the album or whatever. So because they recorded full shows, I think two shows. So there you go.
Hmm,
So yeah, so and you're right. It was great that they were able to put two albums out in 2 years, just the live stuff, and people were buying it. It was it was, you know, people still wanted Cream. So,
for sure,
um,
yeah.
but it just goes to show you though, as a fan or just if you don't know the story and you're just looking through they're you're in the record store looking at the Cream section. It's like, oh, look at these albums they put out, but so, like
Hmm.
three of them are like after they broke up.
Yeah, 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 that's true.
So,
Yeah.
you know, but I guess you could say the same thing about Jimi Hendrix. That's even worse.
Yeah,
Uh,
that never was the Cream. The releases for Cream afterwards made sense, and it didn't feel like they're just trying to cash in.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so there you go. So there's Cream. I mean, literally their whole career was less than 3 years, and it's interesting to see like how everyone went in different directions. And I mean, Blind Faith is kind of what happened next for Clapton, and I guess Ginger Baker kind of showed up at his door like he wasn't expecting that at all. He didn't want Ginger to be in
Yeah,
the band, I don't think.
yeah. Blind Faith was kind of an accident. I don't think Clapton. I mean, he can't really lead a band.
No,
He has a,
no,
after that, he never led a band. He just was solo essentially.
yeah,
I guess with the exception of the Layla album,
right,
but
right,
yeah, that Blind Faith was kind of this is when the term supergroup comes in. I think it was used for that, of course, and
right,
it didn't
right.
work, and it was kind of nice briefly. And that album's got a couple good tracks on it, but it's
Yeah,
not Cream. And
no,
people
it's
wanted
not.
to hear Cream. They wanted to
Yes,
hear Cream.
right. And I think that's why that band was never going to last because they were like, oh, it's like Cream Part Two, and it's like, no, 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 that's not what this is.
Yeah.
I don't think Clapton wanted that, so it was like, oh, I got to get out of here quick. Um, but yeah, that's for another day. That's a whole nother story. But yeah, I would say, what do you think about? I mean, what's your final thoughts on Cream? What would you say? Your concluding thoughts would be.
Well, I would say that Blind Faith is a good example of individual players who got so big that they couldn't even form a band and go out as a new band
Yeah.
because they were so good in what they did, in this case with Cream, and the individuals were so strong that people had certain expectations that they couldn't live up to. So
Hmm.
that's tough for players that are trying to, they're musicians, that's their livelihood. What are you going to do?
Hmm.
They're the great players and they can't seem to make it work, so they got to try something else. So everybody's going to kind of find themselves in the whole when you're going from the 60s to the 70s, things were changing. So
Yeah.
Cream,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were they left they blazed quite a trail, and the groups that followed them, it was kind of a blueprint for hard rock, really.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
a big deal in terms of 60s bands. They're a really big deal, and I don't think they can be overestimated.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. They really were the trailblazers for this whole, heavy rock thing. I mean, they were really the first to
Hmm.
really blaze that trail. And I mean, Tom Dowd said they had Marshall stacks in the studio. I mean, they were way. He said they were like they had to be. They were like, oh my God, this is so loud, and they would pull the mics back. And they
Mm,
had to, they had to,
yeah.
but the sort of heaviness of the group came through on the records. This was something new that people had not heard on album before, I think, and people were like, wow, this is so cool. Like, I love this. Um,
Yeah, and I would say that even though there was demand for them in 70, 71, and they had those albums to meet the demand, I mean, Cream was replaced very quickly. All these other bands came up, and that
yeah,
was the blueprint
yeah,
for all these other bands. So
yeah,
uh, that was great too.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, last thing I'm going to say is a thought that I had before I forget, and that is, I thought it was interesting that, like, you would think of all the guys in Cream that Jack Bruce might have the most chance of like having a successful solo career because he's the voice of the band. He wrote a lot of the songs, and then I don't know, just you would think that you just get a good backing band and you could like still, but he did like what Songs of a Tailor, I think, is his solo record.
Yeah,
Um,
Jack Bruce was kind of the odd man out because since he played bass, you're not going to form a band around a bass guitar.
yeah,
That's
that's
not
true.
going to
That's
happen.
true. That's
So
true.
what he was left with was he was a songwriter and a
Yeah.
very good one, but he needed a certain band, and he never was able to put together a band that was ever really successful. I mean, he had some minor success,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that first album, Songs for Taylor, it's got some nice stuff on it, but it's not what I would call your typical. It's not a hard rock album.
No, it's not. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
he just needed to get together with another band, but he had quite a sizable ego. And these
Yes.
guys, they didn't
Yes.
want to.
All of them
I,
did.
I, I
All of
got,
them.
yeah, I got to believe they wanted to front their own band. Ginger
Yeah.
Baker ended up doing that, and
Right.
so they had sizable egos
Yeah.
that wouldn't allow for them to be just another guy who got an equal say in another band,
No,
which is probably what they needed.
that's a great point. I mean, it's like once you're that high up on the mountain, you can't, it's like I can't get used to being lower on the mountain. It's like forget it. I gotta be the star. I can't, yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Good point.
I want to be the boss.
Yeah, I want
Maybe not the
exactly.
star, but the boss. I think that comes
Yeah.
more natural.
Absolutely. And it's just interesting because it shows you how unique we always talk about you and I talk a lot about chemistry in bands, and there was just this chemistry between those three people that was just
Mm-hmm.
combustible and worked perfectly,
Hmm, for
you know.
sure.
And you can't
Yeah.
just recreate that like that. It just doesn't happen. So but yeah.
No.
Yeah. So I think that might be a good place to stop. I think I don't know what else to say about Cream. I really do agree with you that I think they really did kind of set a template for the next, when you start thinking about these Black Sabbaths and Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and all these bands that sort of became this heavy rock thing. It's kind of started with Cream.
Yeah, it did. Cream was kind of the band that took them there. Obviously, people always cite the Kinks and the Trogs and the Stones and the Yardbirds, but Cream really made it happen. They
Yeah.
were for the FM, what was now FM radio,
Hmm.
and before Cream, and the Yardbirds was still around for a little bit as well. But before that, it was just 2.5 minute songs. Really, it was just whatever you get on the radio.
Yeah. 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 And they kind of broke out of that mold, which was really important. So, yeah. Well, Matt, thank you again so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. This is always fun. I really have a great time talking with you about these bands.
Well, my pleasure, Tom. I
Yeah.
I always have a great time talking about it too. Yeah, I can talk about this stuff all day.
And absolutely. And I'm doing my best to keep these under an hour because I could talk a lot longer. But I've noticed that my daughter told me, she said, Dad, you got to keep your videos under an hour. People turn it off. But
Yeah, I don't know if the conversation is good. I think they'll keep it on. I mean, that's the main
yeah,
thing. That because I don't want to be limited by an hour all the time. But
right.
sometimes it's over, sometimes it's under. You got to go with the flow.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, who knows if that's true or not? But like you said, I agree with you. If the conversation is good, I'll personally I will watch it. I'll enjoy it. So, um, but always, as always, check out Matt's channel, Pop Goes the 60s. He's got some amazing content on there, including History of Cream, which I believe is like multi-part.
Yes,
Um,
that's a two-parter. It actually starts with the Graham Bond organization, which surprisingly, that's a video that's done really well. It doesn't say Cream Part One, it just says the history of the Graham Bond organization.
oh,
So
okay.
that would be where you'd start, and that gives a really good background of the London scene and how Cream coalesced. And then part two is a lengthy one, but yeah, it's two
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great. You'll learn a lot. Check that out. I will put a link to his channel below. Please check that out. And Matt, thanks again. And if you're with us this long, you must be a Cream fan, but why don't you go ahead and go listen to those albums, go pull them out, go crank them up because maybe it's been a minute and you'll have a whole new appreciation for this band again. So thanks again, everybody, and we will see you next time on Curless Mania. Take care.